Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Danny Roest. I'm an intern from the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. I'm an intern here, and I work here with Mike Davis, testing Crawljax on the new Ascent front end. So, remember this tech talk will be public. So questions after the tech talk, first questions should only be general, then I can answer some really specific questions. So what will I be talking about this presentation? First I give you some introduction about Crawljax. So what is it, what can it do? Then I give a short demo, so you can actually see it working. Then I explain why Crawljax is useful, give some examples, how you can use it. Then I talk a little bit about invariant-based testing, how you can use Crawljax, what the current state coverage is, and what the manual effort is related to it. And discuss some future workflows, and then the questions and discussions. First general, then Google specific. So basically, what is Crawljax? Crawljax is an automated testing tool in Java for exploring and testing the different states of any AJAX web application. You can basically see it as a web crawler, but then it also supports JavaScript and AJAX and Swift. Doesn't matter, just crawls it like a normal user. It started as a PhD research by my supervisor, Ali Mesbah, and his first idea was to create a web crawler to crawl an AJAX application and generate a mirror website of it, so it could be indexed by normal web crawlers like the Google crawler. We're currently doing a lot of research on it and working with a team of 4 people. So globally, we'll be using Crawljax. So first, the user specifies what to click, which URL to go to, so Crawljax knows what to crawl. Crawljax uses WebDriver to open the browser and navigate through the application. It does it by doing a depth first scroll, so it clicks as far as it can go, backtracks to the beginning, and goes on and on. So the main power here is you can use plugins and invariants to perform tests, like user-defined tests. And Crawljax generates a state flow graph of the application. So it's like a whole overview of the application, what's next to each other, and how you get there. So here I can explain how it works more in detail. So what you do when you crawl a state, you first scan the DOM tree for clickable elements which are specified by the user. So for example, anchor tags. Then Crawljax scans all these elements, enters form values if it sees some, it could be random values by default, or the user can manually specify values for it. Then it clicks on the element, then it checks if the state is now changed. So are we in a new state? We do this by comparing the DOM. So if the state is changed, we update our state flow graph, because there is a new node and a new edge found. Then we run the user specified plugins, so which are the most of the tests will be run. We could also test for invariants, so if you find the variant in the DOM tree or JavaScript invariants, so this should always hold. And if the new state is allowed to be crawled, we also crawl that again, so it's kind of a recursive thing, because of course it's called again. On a little note, plugins, you could also use plugins before and after the crawling, for example, to log in to a certain page, or after the crawling to generate a report, or do some analysis. So I talked about comparing states, about states. There is a new state, and how can we detect it? So you should know, is there a new state? Are we now in a new state? Is it a previously visited state? So how do we do it? And we do it by comparing the DOM trees. But there's a little problem there, because there are often many non-relevant differences. For example, see here the anchor tag, it's a random ID which changes, but maybe doesn't have any other meaning. So you could use orbital comparatives to ignore stuff like that. So that's our solution. There are comparatives, which can be quite flexible. You can say we want to apply our comparatives only to this pages or to that pages. So you can, yeah, it's a really flexible solution. Okay, we'll now give a short demo about the project so you can see it in action, see what it actually does. Here you can see some code, what is used for the demo. We'll give them a more clear example in the slides later. So we'll just start running Crawljax. It will now run on the new Essence frontend. And you can see it's loading now. Take some time. See, it's indicating exploring the web application.
Oh, it's not crashing. That's good.
It's not crashing today. So this is all explored by only specifying click anchor tags, click Google buttons, and so on. So yeah, this will basically repeat. The current demo will take about 5 minutes, so I'll go back to the presentation and afterwards I'll show you the result by scroll. Yeah, what it exactly did.
How does it know not to click like sign out or other things it shouldn't click?
Yeah, you can also specify that. I will show in the slides how you can specify like some things you don't want to click. You want to click like a lot of things, but not everything. But why is Crawljax useful? Basically, Crawljax can be very useful because you can use it for a lot of different types of testing. What makes Crawljax powerful? What Crawljax makes powerful is that you can automatically discover like the various different states of your application, and you don't have to specify like a manual configuration, like click this, click that, like currently is used in WebDriver or Selenium. It's all based about automation. So another advantage is Crawljax supports any type of web application. It doesn't matter if you have an AJAX web application and uses grid or it's just only PHP and normal links. Doesn't matter. Another big advantage is there's no need to update your test because, for example, when links are changed, IDs are changed, Crawljax exports the application dynamically, so you don't need to update your tests. Everything goes automatically. Another advantage is Crawljax supports multiple browsers. This is done via WebDriver. Thank you. So, what could be examples of plugins which you can do to perform the test? So one of them is security testing. So you can set up a security proxy server, run Crawljax, and read all the RPC requests and so on. Accessibility testing can be a lot of things because you visit a lot of the states. So you can test all the states for right to left things. For example, like Arabic text, formatting of currencies and numbers. You can also take broken links or images, or if the old attribute is set of images, and so on. You can also use it, for example, for regression testing. Because when you crawl the application, you know what you've crawled, so the different paths you've crawled in the application, and you can create a test suite from that and replay the test suite and use DOM comparison to see if there's anything changed to the application. You also do performance testing. So you run Crawljax and you log all the RPC calls that are made, and you can later do some analysis on that. And because Crawljax explores the application so wide, you have a lot of data to do performance testing. You can also do cross-browser testing. For example, if your application works under Linux and under Firefox, it doesn't always have to work on Internet Explorer. So what you can do is run Crawljax and replay what you just crawled in another browser, and then compare the states. So did you find the same elements? Are states the same? Does it contain the same widgets? And there are probably lots of more applications.
In practice, would you expect the DOMs to be, I mean, there might be certain different pattern differences.
Yeah,
in between
purely
browsers.
comparing on the DOM tree
Yeah.
isn't right, because there are a lot of many differences, and yeah, probably not too effective to solve that before comparatives. So what we've done now, and busy now at the moment, is detecting which widgets are there in the DOM and comparing by those. So does this page have the same widgets, the same order? And then you can have a quite a good idea from does it contain the same widgets, or is a link broken because then state isn't reached. So we also created an example tooltip validator. On the AdSense project, you have a lot of help buttons which show some more information about the current page or the current function. So what Crawljax did, at least the plugin, the Crawljax is scan in every state the DOM for the help buttons, click on it, check is there really a message shown, and is this a valid message? So for example here, tooltip article is not found, not the correct message, so you can save that and repair it, file a book for it, or so on. So what we also did, because when we explore the application so wide, you can also do invariant-based testing, which tests for every state. You can say this should always hold. So we did a little example. We said when you have no filter specified, so you should display all platform ads, all ads with any platform, doesn't matter whether, should always be items displayed. So for example, we see here there are 3 items displayed. So when we started crawling, what happened? It unchecked the website filter, so it doesn't show any website ads. But later when we came back, the platform was all, so all ad units should be displayed, but it wasn't the case. So this is an example, an invariant, which you can test on your application, especially with highly interactive user interfaces, and see if everything still holds. So here we detected both. So now about how you can use Crawljax. So the first thing is you specify how you can crawl the application. So you create a crawl specification, and you say click all anchor tags. And for example, click all buttons. So that's quite general because most applications would have anchor tags and buttons. On the AdSense front end, we also have like the Google buttons, the with buttons, so you should also click those. But as you just mentioned, some links you don't want to click. So for example, we can say to the crawler, don't click anchor tags, which are under a certain XPath, so in a certain element. So for example, in the header, where the logout link is, or in the footer, there could be some debugging things, or also like logout stuff. And what we also did, because you don't want to crawl any other websites besides AdSense, is add a crawl condition that you should only crawl URLs with the name AdSense in it. Specify this more specific, but this shows the ID. So form data is by default is randomly generated and inputted into the field, but sometimes it's necessary to enter manual some specific value. So here it shows an example how you could say to a field which has a name or an ID. Subject, set it always to the value Crawljax. So where there is a newsletter field like a checkbox, set this always to true. But for example, sometimes you want to fill in like multiple values in a form because it can lead to different states. So you could create a form, say for the field name, first set the value, then when you encounter it, and the second time you encounter it, same line. So what it basically does is you specify which button is the submit button for that field. There's not always like the real submit button, but you can at least say the link which affects the form. So you say here, set this value in this form before you click the text, the anchor element with the text save. So first save the form with the values Danny and Roest at google.com, and then it will fill later when it comes back to the state. It will fill in Mike and Mike Davis at google.com, and then click save. So that way you can specify multiple form values. So, and how can you use your plugins? There are interfaces for the plugins of different types which can be called. The most common plugin type, I guess, is on new state. So every time you find a new state, you can execute some tests on that state. Are there any violations in this state? Is there anything weird going on? Or anything. So, but it's also important to know what did you crawl with Crawljax and how well does it crawl. So what we did, we compared current WebDriver tests to Crawljax and see what the manual effort has, what the influence is of manual effort. So for example, the blue bar is the current code coverage of WebDriver. The red bar is Crawljax with random form data, and the orange bar is the specified form data, as I showed in the slide before. So as you can see, in general, the all packages means like when you compare the total of the coverage. So you see that the coverage of the WebDriver and random form data is about the same, and the specified form data is higher. So we have three different packages here. So you can see the difference between Crawljax and WebDriver. And what is very interesting to see here is Crawljax has almost no coverage and WebDriver has a lot. So what was it? Basically the form, there was a form that needed a valid URL and some random data wasn't good enough for it, so a lot of code wasn't reached. So what we did, we filled in a simple URL and you instantly see the difference in coverage. So this is also a really good tool to see what you have crawled and have you specified a good crawl configuration. So that basically comes to what is visited by Crawljax, and hopefully the demo is finished now. So I can show you what is crawled, because we also created another plugin which shows what is crawled. So here you see the screenshot again. This is the essence page, what we just crawled. The green links, with the elements that are highlighted with green, are the one that causes a new state, went to a new state, and the orange one didn't cause a new state transition. So for example, when you would click home, when you're already on home, page wouldn't change. There's also light blue, isn't on this page, but it will show you that the text, oh, we already visited this state. So for example, you see here that integrate with analytics now. This link normally opens another window and another URL. So we don't want Crawljax to crawl it, and that's why the crawl condition really has effect. So sure you don't crawl anything you don't want to. So for example, when you click on payments, you go to a new state, see your overview. This is light blue because we've already been here. This is the initial state. Now what's also interesting, for example, if we go to my app, like go and clear are orange. So by the orange, we click them, nothing changes. Because if you don't fill any form value there, it doesn't change, for example. And if you would click right here, see, the page is changed. And when we go back to the initial state, but you also can see here, you see all the activities you can do, like payment, messages, example, account settings. So when you go to messages, we don't click again on overview, payments, example, because we keep in memory what we've already clicked, so we don't click it again in other state. So what it generated, it also generated a graph of the whole application. You can see here, this is the index page, it's now quite small, but you can see here how everything is scrolled and what Crawljax exactly has done. So you can expect, so what did Crawljax really do with my application, what is it visited, so what am I testing if I use plugins for it. So this is a really cool way to browse to what is clicked. It was a very limited role configuration, but for the demo it shouldn't take too long. So you can imagine that for the whole application it will be much more states, so there's also a zoom function, so you could inspect it a little bit better. So, some future work we were going to work on parallel crawling, because crawling can take some time, so we like to do it in parallel, multiple computers or multiple threads on one computer. A related thing to that is the state space reduction. Less states there are, the faster the crawling goes. But more important is, for example, you test a certain state, like for example for layout bugs, and then a slight thing changes in the page isn't interesting. You shouldn't test all of those layout bugs anymore because it can be really slow and you get the same errors multiple times, so it's not interesting. So we're planning to do this with improving our Oracle comparators, making more general Oracle comparators. Another thing we're working on doing research on is automatic detection of invariants. So automatically detect what you always hold in your application.
Thank you very much.